Welcome to the Waking Up Podcast. This is Sam Harris. Just a moment or two of housekeeping before I give you today's conversation. In my last podcast, I mentioned that I'll be looking for a project manager soon, and the applicants have already started coming in. Please wait until I release the job offer on my blog. Otherwise, it'll get confusing. And not knowing how many people will apply for the job, I can't guarantee a personal response to everybody. It seems conceivable that I could get hundreds or more applications at this point. So I certainly encourage you to apply if you are keen for the job and you think you're well qualified based on the appeal I put out there when I do, sometime after the holidays, probably in the middle of January. But wait until then. And if I don't reply personally, know that I got swamped and I needed you, the project manager, to help me with this. So there'll be more on that when that process is consummated. And now for today's guest. I am talking with Garry Kasparov, the former world chess champion, perhaps the most famous of modern times, and now a great critic of Vladimir Putin's Russia, and a great critic of the failures of American and European foreign policy with respect to Russia. Needless to say, this is a very timely conversation, given the man who will soon occupy the Oval Office and given the people he has appointed to advise him. And so without further preamble, I give you Garry Kasparov. I am here with Garry Kasparov. Garry, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
Listen, it's really an honor to get to talk to you. I'm sorry we can't do it in person, but we will be forgiven any audio hiccups here. We're doing this by Skype, and you are half a world away, and it's late at night over there. So again, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, okay. Thanks for modern technology that we can do it, staying 1,000 miles away from each other.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. There are really two broad areas that I want to touch with you. The first I want to get into is politics, obviously, and the recent Russian influence on our presidential election. The second is that we have to say something about the future of intelligent machines, because I've been talking a lot about artificial intelligence on the podcast, and while you will go down in history for many things, one of those things will be that you were the first person to be beaten by a machine in an intellectual pursuit where you were the most advanced member of our species. You will have a special place in history, even if that history is written by our robot overlords. We have to talk about that, but we'll get into politics first. And you've written a fascinating book entitled Winter is Coming. You argue several things in the book, but generally you claim that free and open societies like our own have grown weaker, especially because we no longer think in terms of spreading our values to the rest of the world. Many people consider this a return to some kind of humility and political realism, but you consider it a failure of nerve. And I must say I agree with you there. Your specific claim is that while we're now facing many threats, and many which we seem ill-prepared to deal with, the worst of these threats is coming from Vladimir Putin and his current Russia. So perhaps you can just start there with your political thesis.
Yes, let's start with the title of the book, Winter's Coming. Yeah, I have to confess I'm a fan of Game of Thrones, and I even read all the books. And I thought the title was very appropriate because it could indicate two things. One is that the history, is not developed, on a linear basis. And it was somehow a delayed response to Francis Fukuyama, The End of History in 1992, the best-selling book. And I have to admit that in 1992, I shared the same optimism, thinking that liberal democracies have won, and the rest would be, just a bright future. So it's all up to us to build this future, and the evil has been defeated once and for all. So I think we yet to recognize that, the evil doesn't disappear. So it probably happens in the books, in fairy tales, but in real life, the evil, could be buried temporarily under the rubbles of Berlin Wall. But, at one point it sprouts out, especially if we lose our vigilance and if we turn to be complacent. And also the idea of the title was, again, reflecting the the motto of the House of Stark in Game of Thrones is to indicate that this is not a winter, this is not a climate change, this is not this change of temperature, but this is something that happens again because we are grown weaker, because we don't understand the threat that is coming to hurt us and maybe to destroy our way of life. But it depends on us whether this winter is long or short, whether it's devastating or the effect is minimal. So it's like a warning. So that's why I thought the title would be appropriate. And to my surprise, and I publish a few books, and Sam, I'm sure the publishers, they always come up with 10 different suggestions, trying to shoot away your original title. I mean, this time they accepted the title, recognizing that it had merits, but they were very cautious and they almost rejected the subtitle. They said, "Oh, Vladimir Putin and the enemies of the free world. Is it about a Cold War? Is this just old language that may scare people off?" I said, "Yeah, it's a Cold War because winter is coming." And now when I talk to my publisher, they're very happy that they actually agreed to have Vladimir Putin and enemies of the free world.
I can imagine
on the title of the book, because when they asked me, "So what about what about advertising? How are you going to do it?" Because it was really just a very short cycle for writing and publishing. We, me and Meg Gringert, my co-author, so we approached them in January 2015, and I said at our first meeting that I would like the book to be published in October. They asked me whether I meant October 2016. I said no, 2015, because I hoped that the book would make difference for upcoming presidential elections, and it could help to shape debates on foreign policy between candidates from the major parties. So, and they were not sure that you can do it because they said, "Oh, there's no time for advertising." And I said, "Look, as long as you have Putin as a centerpiece of the book, he will definitely create enough, conflicts, to make sure that the book will be always, on the front page."
Yeah.
Again, unfortunately, this prediction was right. And I have to say that, things that I predicted in the book, they turned to be even worse than I thought, because probably we live in a time when, everything happens much quicker. So the time flies faster than it used to be.
I would just want to stop you there, Garry, for a second, because I want to get into Putin specifically in some depth. But you use this term evil, which I want to flag for a moment, because unfortunately, this term has been really undermined in intelligent conversation. Many people just don't believe in evil.
Sam, it's actually a great point. Thank you very much for actually raising this point, because if we now look at American politics, the partisanship, it reached such a level where people from two major parties consider the opponents evil. So, and you're right, the word evil, has been used and overused in the political debates between people who disagree on many issues but still share the same core values. It's they all represent different wings of liberal democracy. And what I wanted to emphasize in the book, and again, thanks for raising this point, is that we are being attacked by people that are, again, let me use this old cliche, Cold War cliche, the enemies of the free world, because they do not share the same values. And one of the fundamental differences between us and them is we believe, in the uniqueness of human life. So the one person dead, it's tragedy. For people like Putin, hundreds of thousands dead is just, it's a demonstration of strength. It's just statistics that proves that, they are on the winning streak by spreading their influence. So we have to realize that despite all the differences between different political groups and activists in the free world, we're still united by values that makes us very different from the other side of the world, where I could apply word evil, because it really threatens the way of life. The very foundation of the free society and value of human life is one of the things that brings together Putin, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Iranian mullahs. They could look different, but at the end of the day, they believe in something that is not modern, something that pushes us back to the past. And it's for those who are saying, "Oh, unlike Soviet Union, Putin's Russia is no longer an existential threat to the free world because it doesn't have the same ideology. My response is that probably you're right, but the Soviet project, though it was, condemned by history, it was, marked by repressions, by bloodshed, by devaluation of the of human life. It was still a project about the future. It was a futuristic project, based on wrong assumptions about human nature. That's why it failed. But it was still about the future. While today we're dealing with threats that all are looking for ideal society in a distant past. So Putin looks for a 19th century imperial politics, Iranian mullahs for medieval religious inquisition, and ISIS, of course, goes all the way back to the early caliphate.
Mm.
But it's all about something that that has no connection to the modernity, and so that's why we could say that today we see the fight between modernity and archaic forces, and somehow even the last U.S. elections was also about desperate attempt to look for an ideal model of the past.
Yeah.
That's why again I think it's I thought it would be very important to have the book on time for a proper debate about U.S. policy, since foreign policy, since whether we like it or not, United States as a leader of the free world, defines the way the free world moves, one way or another. And unfortunately, this election was about, throwing mud at each other rather than talking about serious issues. And I was quite disappointed, but still, it's probably now while we're digesting the surprising results of these elections, we will have time to think about the sort of the potential impact of all these important foreign policy issues to the life in the United States, especially because it became quite apparent that Putin's influence on the elections, even if it was not decisive, it was still a considerable factor that helped to tilt the election to the Trump side.
Yeah. Well, so before we get into Putin and the election, you've just raised this generic problem we have with dictators with regimes that fundamentally don't share our values. Just generically speaking, how do you think we should deal with this problem?
There's another paradox of modern times, is that unlike 50 or 100 years ago, dictators, they have almost equal access to modern technologies. So the technological advantage was always, an important factor of the superiority of the free world, because, we know that the free society always could mobilize, brains and intellectual resources to come up with new ideas, new industries, new technologies, and always to be ahead.
Mm.
Even Soviet Union, eventually lost the space race, though it was, it was not Putin's Russia. It was, the country that relied on resources of Russian Empire. So the generations of scientists, and it was well advanced. So it was quite a unique experiment, though a failed experiment, and it managed to put Sputnik and the man in space even ahead of the Americans. But eventually, it lost this race because closed societies, they cannot compete. Even the Soviet Union failed to compete with the United States in the technological race. But today, things are different because the globalization, as every new call it technology, every new technological process has two sides, like every coin. On one side, we can spread things around, we can do business, we can socialize, we can connect people. Many good things can happen by using this modern device, which is in everybody's pocket or a purse. But at the same time, it helps bad guys to advance their cause. So you can socialize on the net, but you can also build a very sophisticated terrorist network. And
Yeah.
it just, dictators, as we can see now, they feel very comfortable with these modern devices because, the internet is not yet regulated. It's something that is, is yet to become part of international law. And bad guys, they don't pay attention to any rules or limitations. So they have by definition have an upper hand in something so new and so advanced. And getting access to this is as easy, as buying, food in the store. So it's quite a paradox that while we relied on Twitter, Facebook, Google, and all these new brilliant technologies invented in the free world to promote the ideas of the free world, we're now seeing the opposite effect, that the dictators, the totalitarian regimes, they are successfully using these tools, very sophisticated tools, for propaganda, to actually promote ideas that are very that are opposite to our values. Actually, not even ideas, but more likely fake news. It's more like poisoning minds of people, because it's almost impossible to identify what's true and what's not, since you are receiving so much information. And well-organized forces, supported by massive budgets, as in Putin's Russia. So the propaganda machine, could have a deadly effect, not only in Russia, not only in the Russian-speaking people around the world, but also to on the minds of people in the free world. And this is a paradox that we have to understand, and just to recognize that it's a new challenge, and the free world was not ready for it.
Hmm. Yeah, well, one point you make in your book in several places is that we have pursued a path of engagement with Putin in particular, but with respect to many regimes that are fundamentally illiberal, on the assumption that mere engagement, mere economic and social integration will moderate these regimes and get them to align with our interests and with the interests of sane and decent people everywhere. And you then observe how foolish this has proved to be. And it's pretty clear that some people only understand strength. And this goes back to this issue of evil, because many people have lost sight of the fact that there are people, whether it's individual dictators or even whole cultures or subcultures, certainly, who are committed to very different aims in life. I mean, there are people who are malignantly selfish or just delusional. There are whole cultures that can be organized around delusional ideals. And I think what we're witnessing on our side, especially in recent years under Obama, and I say this as someone who's a real fan of Obama. I mean, I think he's an extremely smart and ethical and thoughtful person. And the contrast to the incoming president here is just appalling to me. But his foreign policy has been so anemic. It seems that our enemies no longer fear us, and our friends really can't rely on us. And yet it's easy to see how we got here, because there's this perception of just this absolute futility of foreign interventions because of what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. And those are, very different wars, as you know. One was probably necessary and one almost certainly wasn't. But they're both viewed as total failures. And there's this, I think, an agreement, certainly on the left and now even on, what's now called the alternative right, that a sophisticated and realistic vision of America's place in the world is one where we should be more isolated, more humble, just any notion of us really leading the world and trying to spread our values all the way across it is some kind of unethical claim upon empire. It seems to me that we have lost our sense that there really are right answers to questions of good and evil. There really is such a thing, potentially at least, as universal human values that we have to fight for.
Now let's start with this, with your analysis about, American intervention or isolationism as an alternative. Look, it's the 21st century. We are just about entering the year 2017. The globalized world is a reality. Globalized trade is a reality. No matter what President-elect says about trade and his threats to sort of to turn it around and just to go back to protectionism, I don't believe it's going to happen, because America is the most globalized economy. And when you look at the United States as a country with 330 million people, the country benefits from global trade. Yes, global trade, as in every trade, as in capitalism, some people win, some lose. But clearly, when you look at the balance, more people, are on the beneficiary side. So you have to think about sort of softening the blow to others, but trying to change things, and to say, oh, now we can go back. We can, back. This is exactly what I said, when I talked about, different societies looking for the ideals that are in distant past. So America in 2017 should look in 2030, 2040, 2050, not to 1950, 1960. Those certain things, I wish country could recover from those decades, and trying to hide in a shell, ignore the fact that someone has to lead. If you create vacuum, and this is the biggest lesson of Obama's presidency. He meant well. He wanted to reach out to American enemies, and he just, he did absolute utmost to remove America, what he thought, was, negative American influence in world politics, trying to sort of work through agreements, compromises. Yeah, it could be great if he had at the other side of the bargaining table people, institutions, states that shared even 50% of his conviction about the world, our world should function. Unfortunately, it was not the case. So for Putin and the like, what they saw flexibility and weakness was an open invitation to spread their influence. America was on retreat, thus creating vacuum, and this vacuum was filled not by forces of peace and prosperity, but by forces of war and hatred. Again, there's no simple answer, for America's role in the world. You separated wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. My problem with the war in Iraq, in 2003, was that, as someone who was born and raised in a communist country, I could never condemn invasion, even invasion that led to a demise of dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's these, people like me, we viewed, the invasion as a liberation. I understand, it could open, Pandora box. We can have a big debate about it. But this is also important for people in the United States to understand the views of those who were born on the other side of Iron Curtain. Yeah. Where, anything that led to the collapse of dictatorship was a good idea. So that's why, we had different views about American presidents, viewing those who were strongest in opposing Soviet Union and communism as our best friends. Again, I understand, it's a subject for debate, but let's, move away from 2003 again, agreeing that, we may disagree on that, and go to 2009. And this is, something that the Obama's decision, to follow. By the way, that was a Bush plan, to eventually move troops out of Iraq. So when in 2009 Obama looked at the global map, I believe he thought that it was a good moment for America to exercise positive influence, soft power, friendship to the nations that wished America ill, and to extend the olive branch to everyone, including Cuba and North Korea. Now, the failure, in my view, is based on the fact that if you play the game, in chess, and if you believe that you made a mistake a few moves ago, the biggest mistake, would be to try to sort of to go back and to change things, because you're already having a certain situation at the board, and that's what happened with Iraq in 2009 when Obama tried to sort of to rectify mistakes made by the previous administration, without recognizing that it's already a new game. America was already there, and by trying to get out, led to what we are seeing these days in the Middle East. We all know where the road paved with good intentions leads. In this case, it led to Aleppo and genocide. So it is very important that we learn from these lessons, because it's now. What follows Obama is much more cynical approach. So if Obama wanted to cut these deals, out of his ideological beliefs that the world should change, now you may have an administration that would like to cut these deals, out of very pragmatic assumptions that that could benefit people who are close to the administration. So ironically, they could be pursuing the same goals, but for very different purposes. I think that America, as long as it remains the the most powerful economy and the most powerful military force in the world, it's doomed to remain the leader of the free world, thus carrying these responsibilities for protecting the world order from different attempts to destroy it. Because if America doesn't do anything, then what's going to happen to NATO? What's going to happen to European security? And now we already saw the result in Crimea. And definitely Putin is not going to stop in Crimea, and he is now, willing to have, a great bargain with Trump about dividing the world and eliminating all security institutions that were standing on his way to global dominance. So I think it's very important that America, recovers its integrity as a global power, and will come up with a view of the foreign policy, which is, by the way, you saw it in these elections, is somehow extension of domestic policy or other way around, and to stop, changing these policies, from elections to elections. Because if from Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan, and that's what I argued in the book, American foreign policy was quite consistent. There were some modifications, but basically all presidents, Democrats and Republicans, they knew what was America's role in the world, and they again, disagreements, they were within the reach. Now, since 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, so we saw American foreign policy working more like pendulum, switching from one side to another. You have Clinton, who did little, then W, who did too much, then Obama, who did almost nothing, and then now it goes to Trump, who can do whatever, nobody can predict. And it's quite interesting that when you look at all presidents, were elected, since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War in the last 25 years, I think it's the first time in American history that the 4 presidents that were elected, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump, they had no foreign policy expertise and very little national exposure. Okay, Trump had it, but it's not political. So it's interesting that's it's the it seems that if Americans looking for something else, so the country didn't want to hear about big problems and wanted just to have a comfortable life. Let's enjoy. And now we reached a point, after these elections that it's time to define America's role in the world. And I don't believe that the United States has a chance to stay away and just to isolate, since the world has changed and very much under American influence. And walking away means that you will have to come back, but when it happens, it will be already under the terms of your enemies.
Yeah, that final point is really worth reflecting on, because to retreat and to ignore the world's problems when we alone among nations have this disproportionate potential influence, to let genocides happen, especially in the case of, we draw a red line and our bluff gets called and then we do nothing. That kind of weakness is really provocative. And as you say, then once we're dragged back into involvement, it's on the terms that are now on the ground. The pieces on the board, to use your analogy, have moved, and we're in a worse position. And so let's talk about the position we're in with respect to Putin at this point, because it seems to me, and you make this point as well, that he's running a very clever dictatorship. It's a dictatorship that, for those who don't want to see it as one, seems to be justified by a high level of support. He holds elections, and he's managed to sanitize his reputation by being taken seriously as a statesman on the world stage. And again, you point this out many times, that many American and European administrations are culpable for this. So this policy of engagement with Putin has given him a free pass to do more or less whatever he's wanted. And of course, this all has been facilitated by a rise in oil prices. But Putin seems like quite a sinister figure. How bad is he?
It's very bad, and he's getting worse. But, we have to give him credit. And you're right, pointing out at his strengths and his ability to manipulate both domestically and internationally. He started in the beginning of this century, so as a president of Russia. So whether he had an idea of turning his rule into dictatorship? I don't know. But he's an opportunist, and he suddenly saw big opportunities. Oil prices, were rising, so giving him, unlimited amount of cash. And also, he just recognized that there was a lot of goodwill on the other side. So he could play games with George W. Bush. It was an amazing, psychological game when they met in June 2001.
Mm.
And Putin told him a story about, hiding, cross, while, being in a KGB school. So because he was baptized by his grandmother or whatever. I mean, it's obviously it's a fake story, but, he made it was a perfect calculation.
Mm.
For George W., that was a story that almost, caused him to cry because it was about religion. So just about affection, about the Putin's connection to religion, and he built a very strong psychological contact with George W., who after this meeting said that he looked into Putin's soul, looked into Putin's eyes and saw his soul.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big victory, and Putin strengthened his ties with George W. by being the first leader calling after 9/11 immediately, recognizing that was a moment, where he could, have Bush, on his side for many years to come. So he was very good in building these relations and looking for friends, because at that time he needed friendship from the Western leaders to neutralize any opposition in Russia. And I remember in 2006 when Putin was hosting the G8 meeting in St. Petersburg, and I was always reluctant to call it G8 because G7 stood for 7 great industrial democracies, and Russia was neither democracy nor industrial power. But Putin, was there. Actually, Yeltsin was the first one to be invited, like an advance payment for immature Russian democracy. And Putin fully capitalized on his position of being one of the members of G8, and it was his turn in 2006 to host it. And it was a phenomenal PR success for Putin, because Russian television, was showing these meetings from every angle. And, they say that, picture is more powerful than 1,000 words, but Putin had both the picture and 1,000 words. And how could people like myself or late Boris Nemtsov, how could we convince even, liberal-minded Russians that Putin was not a Democrat? Putin was not recognized as democratic elected leader, while every other leader of the free world was there, to greet him as one of the equals.
Mm.
So Putin, by using this game, Putin totally neutralized opposition in Russia, and as you pointed out, created an image of, a ruler that was not probably, a true Democrat, but he was not one to fear, not one who could destroy, democratic institutions. And that's why his decision to stay behind Medvedev when he, following constitution, he had to step down, but he stayed, as a prime minister, and we all in Russia knew that it was, he was a puppet master who was pulling the strings. It caused some kind of an illusion for Europe and for the United States, where political leaders believed that they could play Medvedev against Putin, and eventually they could see some kind of peaceful transition of Russia from Putin's, as they thought, slightly authoritarian regime into something more democratic, not recognizing that Putin was buying time to strengthen his grip on power, and eventually he would come back as the all-powerful dictator, as it happened in 2012. And then, as every dictator, he had to change gears, because if he needed friends in the beginning of his rule, eventually he needed enemies, because at a certain time he realized that all economic resources that could generate steady growth of Russian GDP and more important, a steady improvement of living standards for the Russians, these resources have been wiped out by the lower oil prices and also by the aging infrastructure and by endemic corruption.
Mm.
So economy was no longer serving Putin, and he needed something else to legitimize his endless stay in power. And as every dictator, he turned for foreign aggression. As we warned from the beginning, saying Putin was our problem, eventually it will be everybody's problem, because this is the way dictatorship works. And it was amazing that Americans and Europeans didn't want to see the rise of anti-American, anti-Western propaganda on Russian television. And since 2012, it became, a staple of Putin's domestic propaganda to blast America for anything that happens in the world and to present Russia as the sort of besieged fortress of good surrounded by global evil. By the way, they use this language. This is the language used by Russian
Right,
television.
right. Is it true that the level of anti-Americanism in Russia now is the worst it's ever been?
Look, maybe it was worse in the 40s and the 50s. I don't know, but it's definitely definitely the worst in my lifetime.
Mm.
And I can rely on my mother's comments. She's turning 80 next March, so she was born under Stalin. And of course, propaganda machine was, different because, there was no television, there was only radio, and then, primitive TV. So it's hard to compare to these days. But she said that, by listening to Russian media today, um, she couldn't help but thinking that while Soviet propaganda was very intense and it was brainwashing, but it was still about bright future. So Soviet propaganda tried to present something that is more, it's more positive, something futuristic that that could make a great deal of difference for everybody. So they talked about, of course, it was false talk, but still, they talked about communist brotherhood, generations ahead of us. And about competition between socialism and capitalism, and about socialism, so gaining ground. So there was some kind of a competition about fighting for the better future of humanity. Putin's propaganda is more like cult of death.
Mm.
So Russia has no allies. It's all about Putin defending Russia against global evil. It's we all maybe have to die, but it's the language is so poisoning. And my mother says it's depressing.
Mm.
It is so depressing. And, because of modern technology, it comes, as we say in Russia, from every kettle. So it's just it's from everywhere. So, and it's 24/7. And this propaganda, which, just it's follows oral rules that, it should be total lies. So it's not just, some true, some lies, but it's basically, it's as white as black, war is peace, freedom is slavery. So it's totally reversing the facts. And if it's so intense as it is now, it works, and it works way beyond Russia now, because we could see polls in some European countries where people, ordinary people in these countries, they are just buying the Putin versions of the events in Ukraine, in Middle East, and elsewhere.
What's the significance of his being a former KGB figure? President Bush Sr. ran the CIA, and I've never heard it said of him that made him somehow nefarious by definition. Obviously, there's a false moral equivalence here, but this is the way many people would think about it. How do you think about his KGB past?
Yeah, but you mentioned it's false moral equivalence. I mean, KGB is an organization that that I believe was criminal from day one. It was built by Lenin and his associates, to destroy whatever was left of freedom in Russia. And it had a history of going after political opponents of the regime, and it's one of the most nefarious acronym in the Soviet history, KGB. So these three letters. And Putin in 1999, while being still a prime minister, when he spoke at the meeting of KGB officers at the headquarters in Lubyanka Square, he said, once KGB is always KGB. And that, you couldn't say it's better, it's a recognition of the fact that, he never, betrayed his organization. And he always believed that, they had some kind of rights, to rule the country, and just to basically they were always above the law. So if we are talking about Bush 41, who was the head of CIA, he was he was still a civilian, and even as a head of CIA, he knew that he was under some kind of supervision of the legislation and the president. So there were many things that and still hopefully there in America, that guarantee checks and balances. So you can hardly imagine one institution in the United States going just totally wild. So it's probably we'll still have to see the resilience of U.S. democracy in the years to come. But in the Soviet Union, it was the opposite. So the KGB was always above the law. So it's the whole idea that the organization was the law itself. And while today we're looking at Putin's actions, I always warn people that you should remember about his true nature. He's a KGB guy, so that's why while he's not alien to the idea of using force. He can, decimate cities. He can order carpet bombing. He can, order genocide. But at the same time, he always prefers to deal with more clandestine methods. So the just looking for kind of hybrid wars and every opportunity to buy favors, to blackmail people, to have a covert operation. And the fact is that his reputation is still quite sanitized, as you just said a few minutes ago, worldwide, is a result of these operations that have been heavily funded by Putin and well designed, adjusting to the certain specifics of different countries and regions.
Do you think there's any truth to the rumor that he might be the richest person on Earth at this moment?
I think we should first agree on the definition, the richest person on Earth, because if you mean him being the richest man who can walk away with his money, I doubt, because we understand that whatever happens in U.S. presidential elections, I mean, Bill Gates will be Bill Gates. So the political, even political tsunami in America is unlikely to change his fortune or Warren Buffett's or even whoever is the president of Mexico. I don't think it will affect Carlos Slim.
Right.
Now, Putin, I believe, by the amount of money he controls, he is far ahead of Slim, Buffett, and Gates together, because he controls hundreds of billions of dollars. Since he is the all-powerful dictator of Russia and the Russian budget and the Russian hard currency reserves, and the fortune of many oligarchs, they are somehow connected to him. He is in charge, which means he can channel the money any way he wants. But this money, is under his control as long as he is all-powerful dictator.
Right.
So the moment he loses power, he loses everything. So he's nowhere to go. You may call it a golden cage, whatever, but he is chained to Kremlin since there's no life for him, neither political nor maybe physical life outside of his residence in Kremlin.
I want to spend a little time talking about the problem of moral equivalence here, because obviously you've painted a picture of Putin being a person who's really intrinsically hostile to the interests of freedom-loving people everywhere. But then obviously you'll hear from the other side that we have provoked him, that we, by expanding NATO, are responsible for everything that appears to be aggression on his side. And then during the campaign, there was this really delirious use of a phrase on the Trump side that Hillary Clinton was going to start World War III with Russia for merely suggesting that she was in favor of a no-fly zone in Syria. There's this almost masochistic moment of self-criticism on the side of both the left and the right in the West with respect to Putin's behavior. Can you reflect on that a little bit?
Again, it's what you just said. It's true, and it's very much the result of very successful propaganda operation conducted by Putin's cronies, agents, and lobbyists in the free world over years. I mean, let's start with the NATO expansion. This is one of the very popular myths, simply a lie, that at one point Bush 41 and Jim Baker, promised Gorbachev not to expand NATO. There are no documents to reflect this agreement. And let's start with that. Maybe there was a kind of a conversation. We don't know, but it's just never American presidents or European leaders or NATO command did such a pledge. Now, there's also a moral factor, moral weakness in the position of those who say, "Oh, we're provoking Russia." I mean, this is exactly, playing in the hands of Putin, who wants to go back to the 19th century or maybe early 20th century, the imperial politics, what I call. It's where you have big countries, Russia, America, maybe Germany, maybe the UK, to decide for others. And we decide what happens with other countries. For God's sake, live in 21st century. Are we going to say that people in Estonia, or I actually now in Tallinn, or in Latvia, Lithuania, or in Poland, I'm mentioning NATO countries, or in Ukraine, or elsewhere, they have no rights to decide their own future? Thanks God, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are in NATO, because otherwise Russian tanks would be rolling on the streets of Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius. And these people experience, I wouldn't call it a genocide, but it was something close to genocide after it's 50 years of Soviet occupation, and people still here remember that. It's very fresh in the genetic memory of people in the Baltic nations. The Poles can tell you a lot about Soviet occupation, as many Eastern European nations. The whole notion that we have to decide how to make Russia happy, it's just it's placed straight into Putin's hands. Or when I hear talks about Ukraine being a buffer state, why on earth we decide for 45 million Ukrainians, who, by the way, proved to be wars of freedom, but fighting against Russian invasion, trying to protect their sovereignty, which, by the way, was guaranteed, and now we're talking about documents, by Budapest Memorandum. This is something, again, to refresh the memory of those who forgot about it, or maybe some of your listeners never heard of this document. In 1994, Ukraine signed a memorandum in Budapest with the United States, Russia, the UK, exchanging its nuclear arsenal for its territorial integrity. And Ukrainian nuclear arsenal was not just a joke. It was the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. It's nearly 2,000 nuclear warheads, which is more than China, France, and England combined. So a Russian signature, Boris Yeltsin's signature, was there under this document. Bill Clinton's signature was under this document, and John Major, of course, of the UK Prime Minister. Of course, it was not a binding document, but the fact is that America, United States, pushed Ukraine to give up its nukes. By the way, it was a good idea because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the nuclear warheads were spread between Russia proper and then Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And this agreement in Budapest, which eventually joined by Belarus and Kazakhstan, helped to accumulate all the nuclear warheads in Russia, which made it easier, for any nuclear negotiations for the future. But there was a guarantee to the Ukrainian state, sovereign state, of its borders, and one of the guarantors was Boris Yeltsin. And I could remind those who thought it was not enough that every Russian president, including Putin and Medvedev, and every Russian parliament since 1991 signed numerous treaties and documents with Ukrainians, never mentioning Crimea as an issue. So for 23 years, the issue was not on the table. So that's why, when you were talking about provoking people, provoking Russia by sort of being sensitive to people's demands, whether it's Ukraine, Poland, Baltics, or other countries, for freedom and for their desire to restore their sovereignty, again, you're pushing us back to the past. You are ignoring the fact that people are, equal, and small nations must have their voice when it concerns their own freedom and sovereignty. And speaking about NATO expansion, there's certain facts, that totally refutes, the whole idea that NATO was building, something that was threatening to Russia. By year 2013. There was not a single American tank in Europe. And I should, emphasize it. Not a single American tank. And people understand that tanks, those are, the forces, the part of military that could advance. This is, if you want to attack, you need tanks. So it's NATO troops, that were not even near Russian border. And only now, after Crimea, and after numerous requests from the Baltic states and from Poles, several hundred Americans and other NATO troops, have been there was a decision to station them near Russian border. But obviously, this is again, they're very small contingents, and it's happened after Crimea. So before Crimea, for 1,000 kilometers, west of Russia, there were no NATO soldiers that could pose any potential threat to Russian interest. Yes, there was an anti-missile system, American, but it was clearly aimed at dealing with potential Iranian threat, and it was totally insufficient to prevent, God forbid, in case of nuclear Armageddon, Russian ballistic missiles from crossing the continent and reaching the United States. So I'm happy to talk about facts. I'm happy to talk about concepts. But I'm afraid that we are now where we are in just thinking in the swamp of lies and myth. Widely promoted and distributed by Kremlin's propaganda.
It seems clear, even though no one wants to think about it, nuclear weapons really change everyone's calculation about what sorts of conflicts are even conceivable. And I think there's a default assumption, I never hear it articulated, but there's this assumption that we can't have any conventional military engagement with Russia because that puts us on this slippery slope toward Armageddon. And that was the fear that you certainly heard expressed about Hillary Clinton's foreign policy during the election. And I guess this also extends to any explicit cyber warfare or a response to the meddling of Russia in our election that would be deemed too strong. If we began to act aggressively against Putin, even the other oligarchs, let's say they have assets abroad that we could freeze, right? I think people begin to worry that the big bombs will start to fall in response to this. So in light of that concern, what do you think we should have done over Crimea, for instance, when that was annexed, or any of these other provocations?
Look, I agree that the nuclear bombs have changed the calculations over any military conflict. But unfortunately, the rhetoric that you mentioned now, it resonates with the 30s. Of course, there was no nuclear. There was no threat of nuclear Armageddon at that time. But we remember that public opinion in the United Kingdom and France, even in the United States, was dead against another military conflict. So the people still remembered, the World War I, and nobody wanted another confrontation with Germany over some countries in the east of Europe. So some countries, as I think Chamberlain said, the ordinary Englishman couldn't find on the map. The problem, when you're dealing with dictators, that they don't ask why, they always ask why not, and that they don't stop unless they stop. So you could think that Crimea is far away, as many Europeans thought, oh, Syria was far away. What is Syrian conflict had to do with our security, with our prosperity, with safety of our houses, and with our political system? In fact, it had it had a huge impact on European political life because refugees, the millions of refugees that were fleeing to Europe, they changed the political balance by enabling Putin's best allies in Europe, the ultra-nationalist groups in Europe, to gain more popularity and to weaken the mainstream political parties. This is a result of the war that was, a couple of thousand miles away. Now, Crimea was just, an invitation for Putin to move, beyond, established borders after 1945. There was a world that we used to live in after World War II that, had borders, and we all knew that these borders, must not be touched because, this is something that guaranteed, the security and peace. And Putin basically, just erased all these arrangements by, starting from the scratch, saying, I can take whatever I believe is mine. Now, you think that it's just far away, but, it has nothing to do with you. But you understand that in 2016, Putin had, Putin's propaganda, Putin's cronies, Putin's lobbyists, Putin's agents, they had an impact in U.S. elections by actually pushing a candidate that he thought would be more appropriate for his plans of global dominance. Now, the whole story about Hillary Clinton, ready to start World War III came directly from Russian television, which was kind of amazing. But many times during the campaign, and even afterwards, Donald Trump repeated assumptions that were first, circulated on Russian television.
Hmm.
So Hillary Clinton was a politician with experience. I think she made terrible mistake with this doomed reset, this failed reset button that he pushed with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. But I'm sure she learned from her mistakes. And I was not a fan, and the reason I supported her during this campaign because I thought Trump was much worse. But having choice between those two politicians, I had no hesitation because for me, as I said, it was not supporting Hillary but supporting sanity.
Mm.
And many American presidents dealt with this threat of nuclear Armageddon. Harry Truman faced Joseph Stalin, not Vladimir Putin, Joseph Stalin. And please don't tell me that Stalin was, was less dangerous and less powerful than Vladimir Putin. John F. Kennedy faced Khrushchev, and that was probably the height of Soviet sort of space power. So the Soviet Union was on the rise, and again, after being weak on Cuba, Kennedy eventually showed strength, and Soviets backed off, as Stalin backed off from West Berlin, and Ronald Reagan faced Soviet Union and Afghanistan, and it was he called it evil empire, and he continued the policies by institutions established and built by Harry Truman, and it led to a victory in the Cold War. Trying to sort of to appease a dictator, especially at a time when he already crossed all the red lines and he burned all the bridges, it's just simply to incite his appetite. And for Putin, the lack of proper reaction in Crimea and his war in eastern Ukraine and led to his adventure in Syria, it was all a demonstration of weakness. And eventually he thought about having global influence, sort of spreading his propaganda and influencing, as he hoped, the result of the elections. Because American election was not the first one when he exercised his power. You can look at Europe and Putin's cronies, Putin's lobbyists. They have been very active in promoting his agenda. And we look at the European political map now. Angela Merkel is just is the sort of the last stronghold of common sense and sanity in Europe. Because I have very little expectations for France. Since most likely it will be a fight between François Fillon, who is Putin's friend, and Marine Le Pen, who is on Putin's payroll.
Okay, so given everything you've just said about Putin, what are we to make of the fact that Donald Trump hasn't said a single negative word about him? I mean, is he just totally clueless, or is he focused on his business interests, or do you think the Russian government actually has something over him? I mean, how do you interpret this? Because this is, for a Republican presidential candidate, this is deeply inscrutable, surprising, really unthinkable behavior. I mean, given where we've come from, and this is now, it has infected the entire Republican Party. There's a poll result I'm looking at here where in 2014, just 10% of Republicans held a favorable view of Putin. And that moved to 24% in September, and it's now at 37%. So this is clearly in response to some of the propaganda you have described. But we're talking about the Republicans. And this is the party of Reagan, the quintessential Cold Warrior. And now we have a incoming president who has surrounded himself with people linked to Putin, people linked to Gazprom, the state-controlled natural gas company, and to other Russian oligarchs. So just how scary is this situation when we're talking about this seeming alliance between Donald Trump and Putin himself and some of his closest cronies?
During the campaign, at the very end of the campaign, I think that's once I had many interviews, and I think I had once on Fox, when I was attacked for defending Hillary Clinton, and I said, this is one good thing about Hillary Clinton. I can tell you, I know exactly how bad she was. We knew about foundation, we knew about emails, but I mean, we knew everything. So as I said, I was not a fan. And I believe that many of the things that she did, they were wrong. But the problem with Donald Trump that we don't know how bad he is. We have no idea. I mean, that worries me more than everything. So if we start with the facts, throughout the campaign, he failed, or you say he didn't want to criticize Putin, and he had many opportunities at the debates or at his rallies or at his interviews to denounce Putin. He didn't do that. And for somebody who flip-flopped on almost every major issue to be so consistent, I mean, that's a sign of some kind of connection. We don't know exactly the connection, but again, that's the biggest problem of all. And I was surprised that Democrats didn't push hard enough to force Trump to reveal his taxes, because we don't know who and how saved Donald Trump from his last bankruptcy in 2008, 2009. There was an infusion of foreign capital. How much of this capital came from Russia? And in fact, it's amazing that many Republicans, they are now trying to pretend that it doesn't matter, whether President of the United States owes money to foreign powers. Maybe it's Russia, maybe it's China, but definitely as a real estate developer, he owes money to some corporations. And we don't know his taxes. We don't know, by the way, we don't know the size of his empire. He says he's a billionaire. Some people say, no, it's a fake, he talks about his name, having a massive value. Probably it has now. But in fact, his real wealth is hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, it's all about speculations. But unless we know exactly how much money, is worth today, what kind of, money owes to foreign powers, to foreign corporations. I mean, we are just, entering the era of conflict of interest, which is more typical for Russia. Because this is a problem of states run by oligarchs, when you don't know when the government ends and the business begins, or other way around.
Yeah.
So, and the fact is that, some prominent Republicans pretend that it doesn't matter, bothers me a lot. I mean, it's a lot of the things that Donald Trump said, during the campaign bothered me, because it's amazing that the party, as I said, of Ronald Reagan, now is ready to oppose the free trade. But I want to brush aside ideology right now. I want to concentrate on the conflict of interest, and especially on the potential influence of the hostile foreign power in the U.S. presidential elections. Again, I'm shocked, that's many Republican senators are just, opposing the idea of full investigation of Russian hacking, because we understand Russia played a role. Again, I can accept the statement that it was not decisive. Though when you're talking about elections decided by less than 100,000 votes in 3 states, and when the winning candidate actually lost nationwide elections, by nearly 3 million votes. So, you have to investigate, because, the fact is that Putin tried to influence the elections, I don't know whether it was total success for him, but he definitely tried. And we could see the WikiLeaks, releasing the Clinton's emails and portions, and the fake news industry. And we're talking about industry. This is not a fake news about, Kardashians, or just, some pop stars. It's a fake news industry that promoted a cause, a political cause, and they were very good in creating the fake conservative sites, creating stories and making sure that people, could be reached. Again, when you're talking about, less than 100,000 people that, that decided elections in 3 states, it probably had an effect. Again, we don't know the size of the effect, but it did have an effect. And Putin was not even hiding the fact that he was there. And by the way, one of the reasons that Putin, was so persistent in trying to influence the elections was one of the Obama's phrases that, again, for me, it was the best proof that Obama never realized the true nature of dictatorships. When I think it was when addressing the nation in the speech of the Union, I think Obama called Russia regional power. Now, while dealing with a dictator, never insult him, never talk big by doing nothing or little. So, because it's an invitation for dictator to actually prove you're wrong. And I remember that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, while giving an interview to Christian Amanpour on CNN, he said with a wry smile, it's when he was asked about Russian intervention, meddling with these elections. He said with a wry smile, it's so flattering for regional power to be blamed for interfering in the U.S. elections.
Right.
That's so. yes, it's the very assumption that Putin was not, informed about this hacking is just, it's a denial of reality. In a country like Russia, dictator, all-powerful dictator, especially a guy coming from KGB, was one to authorize such massive clandestine operation against the United States. And again, we saw regular claims, from Russian television. Again, it addressed Russian-speaking audience, but obviously these stories, were translated and spread around the United States and the rest of the world, repeating the same stories about Hillary Clinton being a candidate, being a hawk, being a danger, someone who would start a nuclear war with Russia, while Donald Trump, could be a man who would restore good relations between Russia and the United States. And I was asked many times, after the elections, so what's wrong about it if Trump wanted to have good relations with Russia? And my response is having good relations with any other country is fine. The problem is that before you build relations with dictators, and that's, by the way, also criticism of Obama, you have to reassure your allies. And Trump, by definition, Trump, poses such a threat to the established world order. And that's probably one of the reasons Putin liked him. Even if we assume there were no other connections, there was nothing tangible that Putin could hold that could compromise Trump. But even, Trump as an individual could be a perfect agent of chaos, something that Putin is looking for as a counterpart, somebody who would treat Crimea as the sort of hostile takeover of the lucrative piece of real estate, somebody who would look for NATO and small NATO countries as potentially bargaining chips for another big deal, a massive deal that could change the face of this planet. And the fact is that Trump, picked Rex Tillerson as his Secretary of State. Yeah. I mean, just reassures, reaffirms all these fears. And by the way, Trump said, the Rex was very good in conducting these massive deals. Now, what kind of massive deal the Secretary of State is planning to cut? It's, I thought, Secretary of State is a top American diplomat representing the free world, the leader of the free world, not someone who is going to make, deals based on oil or other natural resources. We know that if Putin had his choice of Secretary of State, I have no doubt he would pick up Rex Tillerson as number one on the list, because Tillerson had built very strong relations with Putin, with Igor Sechin, the head of Rosneft, Russian biggest oil company, state-owned company, and Putin's closest confidant. And he called them friends. And I'm also troubled by comments from some of leading, Republicans saying, "Oh, being friendly, it's not that being friends." I mean, don't play semantics. He called Sechin friend, and I don't know many, if you help me, of any American businessman receiving the Order of Friendship from Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. And that was a demonstration of Putin's personal ties, because this is not the highest award, and Putin doesn't have to do it himself. But it was very important to demonstrate it, that Tillerson was very close to Putin personally. Tillerson has been lobbying the lifting of sanctions. Yeah, and now we recently found out that he was a director of the offshore company in Bahamas with Igor Sechin. And then when you look at Trump's pick for Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, it's another big business, a billion euro business with Vexelberg, another Russian oligarch.
Even Flynn had some connection with.
Now, Flynn connection is another story, because yes, Flynn flew to Moscow. He was sitting next to Putin. He was paid to be at this event. I didn't like what Flynn has been saying, and obviously, having him as the national security advisor, definitely, encourages Putin, because Flynn was always, promoting this. Fake idea of fighting ISIS together with Russians. But as for Tillerson and Ross, they had business ties, close business ties with Russian oligarchs. And how are they going to defend U.S. national interest? I mean, it seems to me that the very idea of conflict of interest is alien for Trump's administration. And I hope that eventually, Democrats will get their act together and they will have enough support among Republicans, rank and files, to actually, raise the issue. Because look, Trump is Trump, but we have to be sure that his administration will not privatize U.S. governmental institutions, and will not treat U.S. Foreign policy treaties America signed, American allies as this element of this of the new grand bargain.
I've given up trying to reach true supporters of Trump with argument at this point. I came out prior to the election very hard against Trump on this podcast, and I have, I think, encountered the limits of persuasion on this point. But I think it would be interesting, if any Trump fans are still listening to this podcast, for them to consider just what the world would look like at this moment with the opposite result. So just imagine Hillary Clinton had won, and she had won with the seeming help of Putin, and then she just stacked her cabinet with people who had direct ties to the oligarchs, and she refused to say a single negative word about Putin, no matter what the context, right? How would the Republicans have responded at this point to this? It's hard to see that they would be so sanguine. You would not have Republicans getting on CNN talking about the difference between being friends and being friendly. I think one could well imagine that we would have something like a national emergency, given how strongly the Republicans would seek to pull the brakes here. And yet we're just kind of meandering toward the inauguration without any real grappling with the implications here. And again, we simply don't know what we don't know, but there is something truly scary about how Trump has proceeded here. And as you said, he has not hesitated to complain about both sides of any given issue. He'll change on a dime and express seemingly appropriate criticism of something once he's taken the wrong side of it, and he'll talk out of both sides of his mouth about seemingly everything except this issue.
Yep. Except this issue, yes. When we talk about sort of Russian hacking, meddling in U.S. elections, and can we hear words? Oh, show us the proof. What is the data? And it's quite amazing to hear from Republicans, sort of denial of validity of CIA report and then FBI and other intelligence agencies. But it's this: if you look for a potential crime, you definitely look for a motive, for an opportunity, and for a pattern. And all three are here. We know the motive. We know the opportunity. They have been using WikiLeaks, and all the fake news stories, just to discredit Hillary Clinton. Yes, I believe that 90%, maybe 95% of the stories that were released by WikiLeaks, related to her true emails. But how do we know that some of these emails were not doctored? Just slightly adjusted? Because it's all virtually impossible to actually to find out, whether everything was authentic. Most of this, yes, of course, was authentic, and they used it very professionally.
Presumably they didn't doctor John Podesta's risotto recipe.
No, okay, yes. Yeah, and also the pattern. And that's, for me, this is the most important thing. They have been doing it across Europe.
Right.
Okay, you don't trust CIA, you don't trust FBI. What about German intelligence? What about Swedish intelligence? What about Estonians? What about almost every other European country where they have been, they have been crying loud that the Russian hackers have been trying to steal documents from the most secretive files, trying to undermine political process, trying to sort of compromise mainstream politicians. This is a pattern. So you have a motive, you have opportunity, you have a pattern, and I'm not from CSI, but in this case, the benefit of the doubt goes to CIA.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, Garry, we've now terrified everyone just in time for the holidays. Let's touch another topic, which is also terrifying in the right hands. Unless you have any more you need to say about.
No, it's this. No, but this is the last thing I want to say. That is just, it's the. I don't understand, that some people are saying give him a chance, Trump a chance. Let's
Mm,
wait and see. And I always again, I'm willing to give a benefit of the doubt, but in this case, I want to hear, something more concrete, and I believe we must push Trump and his administration to denounce Putin, to go strong, in defending U.S. national interest.
yeah.
And unless we hear the statements, trust me, you'd better be loud now than screaming in your jail cell. So just, make sure that, we are now making this case public and forcing administration and, many other Republicans, in the Senate and in the Congress, just across this land, to react. Because at the end of the day, it's not about Trump. It's not about Hillary Clinton. It's about a first case of hostile foreign power, maybe trying, maybe, changing the results of the elections. It doesn't matter. It was an attack on an American political system, an attempt to undermine the integrity of the political process of the United States. You may call it an aggression. And if you let it go, trust me, they will not stop. Dictators do not stop until they're stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. If there's one point of contact between what we were just talking about and the new topic of artificial intelligence, it is this issue of the increasing significance of cyber espionage and cyber warfare. I think until we get a handle on internet and information security, we are quite clearly in a position of asymmetric disadvantage. We are the prime target for every regime on Earth. And in terms of their abilities to bring the relevant talent to bear against us, it seems virtually unlimited. You don't need to be even a Russia to successfully cause chaos for the U.S., whether it's in the private sector or whether the government. I mean, we clearly have to get a handle on that. Now, just to come to your unique experience here. Now, chess is this much mythologized game. It's really a kind of a quintessential intellectual activity, but it's actually a fairly simple one in a way, and similar to the way that music and mathematics can be simple. And this is one of the reasons why you have child prodigies in these areas, and you don't have child prodigies in novel writing or political debate or any other area that is intellectual in a different sense. And this is one of the reasons why chess was one of the first things to fall to artificial intelligence. So I just want to ask you briefly about your experience there. Now, you won against Deep Blue in 1996, but then lost in 97, but it was very close, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm just wondering, how did this affect you personally? I mean, did you find this intellectually interesting or just an insult, or what was that like?
It's a long story, so I could recommend your audience, just to wait for my new book that is coming out in 4 months.
Right.
Deep Thinking, that will be released in the beginning of May next year for the 20th anniversary of my second match with Deep Blue. And thank you for reminding people that I won the first match in Philadelphia in '96, because everybody seemed forgetting this fact.
Right.
And then, I was quite upset that IBM, didn't want to play the third match, the rubber match, and to give me a chance to sort of improve my chess. Of course, it's a painful story. It's a painful story because, it's just, as you correctly stated. So I would be, one entering history. So as the chess champion, someone represented humanity in the era of intellectual pursuit and was beaten by the machine. So I waited 20 years, and there are 3 chapters of my new book to this match. Actually, the book is about man and machine. So it's where machine intelligence ends and human creativity begins. Because for me, it's a much bigger picture. So and the reason I wanted to write the book is not just to sort of settle old scores, by writing about the match and giving my version of what's happened then, but it's just to demonstrate that we should not be paralyzed by this dystopian vision of the future. So worrying about killer AI and the super intelligent robots is like worrying about overcrowding on Mars. So we should look at it from a different perspective, and that's why after the match, I looked for the opportunity, just to work with the machines. If you cannot beat them, join them. Yeah. So and that's why I came up with a version of what I call advanced chess: man plus machine versus man plus machine. So how to couple the human power of creativity and machine brute force of calculation. So how to improve our decision-making formula. And it's, while being, in the speaker circuit, I know it's a great demand now. People want to know more about it because now AI is threatening white-collar jobs. Though it's the before, for decades, centuries, probably millennials, machines have been gradually replacing blue-collar jobs, but they didn't have the same effect on people writing articles and books.
Yeah.
So now we could feel that machines are entering a very different area of human intellect, and we all really worried. And just having a few more words about the matches that. While writing the book, I learned new facts. I did a lot of research, analyzing the games with modern computers and also soul searching, and that changed my conclusions. So I'm not writing any love letters to IBM, but my respect for the Deep Blue team went up, and my opinion of my own play, and by the way, Deep Blue's play, went down. So you'll find out that Deep Blue won the match. Though, of course, psychological atmosphere of the match was not very friendly to a human player. But again, just read the book, and I thought it was just an important opportunity for me to tell my side of the story. But again, I'm looking into the future, and I think that chess, still offers a unique opportunity, like being a field where you can look at the man-machine cooperation, because I think the future belongs to man plus machine, humans plus machine decision-making cooperation, and we have pretty good experience in the game of chess how to enhance this form of cooperation.
So, how much better are computers now by themselves? Are there computers or computer programs that you couldn't get a game off of that would just beat you 1,000 games to nothing? Have they advanced that much?
First of all, yeah, let's explain to your audience that it's today you can buy a chess engine, put in your laptop, that will beat Deep Blue.
Right.
Again, it's not 1,000 because but it's quite easily. Now, playing a machine today, it's some kind of redundancy, because no, I will not lose all the games. There will be some draws, so I will definitely probably survive in a few games. But the problem that humans are facing by playing machines is that we are not consistent. We don't have a steady hand to to play under this pressure, because our games are always, they're always marked by good and bad moves. And when I say bad moves, it's not about making a blunder. It's just about inaccuracies.
Right.
Our play is uneven, and any inaccuracy, that in human chess, human versus human, very often, remains unnoticed. Could be most damaging when you're facing the machine. So it's about our ability to play high quality moves for hours, because again, even if we're reaching a good position, so we inevitably we get complacent. So the human psychology actually works against us.
Yeah.
So that's why, for instance, if I have a machine, even a weak computer on my side, facing much more powerful machine, the chances, the table could be turned. I could have a great chance of winning. Most likely, probably a strong GM with machine assistance. Even not a very strong machine will beat a very powerful computer, because if I get, if I reach a good position, I don't have to play anymore. I just switch to the machine, or I can guide the machine. So I definitely eliminate blunders. I eliminate the very root of human weakness while facing the computer. So that's why, I'm promoting the idea of combining our forces, because also something that is probably it's also requires an explanation, because machine learning is great, but it's fueled by more and more data. But the quality jump from, say, 10,000 pieces of data to 10 million might be huge, but then to 10 billion, not so much, because we are, reaching the paradox of diminishing returns.
Mm.
Yeah, and also, it's the, let's say, self-driving cars or surgery. So 90% of accuracy is fine for translating a news article. It's
Right.
good enough, yeah? 90% accuracy for driving a car?
That's a bad day on the road.
Yeah, even 99%? Yes, so it's the, no, I think we just, what I'm trying to explain in this book, it's more like, it's that those things are inevitable. We are entering this era, and there's nothing, there's nothing definite about it.
Yeah.
It's not, that the outcome is already decided. As I said, just we are in the last, few decades, we moved from utopian sci-fi to dystopian sci-fi. So we always see machines like Matrix or Terminator. No, it could be, but it's very much depends on us, on our attitude, and on our ability to come up with some, new ideas. Because it's the machines. They're quite good in just in helping us, or actually exploring the known. They can do the known, but not the unknown. So that's why what is left for us is actually to come up with new ideas, new industries, space exploration, something where we always push the borders, push the frontiers, and then then machines they will have to learn from us. So it's probably a good new challenge for us to prove that we're not redundant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm always I'm always optimist, because I believe that this what we invent always is good, because it pushes us to look for sort of higher grounds.
So it hadn't occurred to me to ask this question, but chess is the canary in the coal mine in at least two senses. There's the first victory over a human. You have a chess engine that's just unambiguously better than any person on Earth now. I assume that's a safe assumption. Is it still true to say, as you just suggested, that a combined human-computer chess team is better than any single computer at chess at this moment? I mean, would you, with a great
Oh,
chess
absolutely, no,
engine, beat?
absolutely. It's oh yeah, it has been proven already in several experiments. I
Right.
can tell you more, from experiments of what we call freestyle chess, where you can play on the internet, and it's open for cheating. Basically, any form of chess is allowed.
Hmm.
So you can play with computer, with several computers. So we know that a team of average players, that can master several computers, will be the strong player with strong computer. The process will be superior over potential quality of understanding.
Right.
And machines, the most powerful machines stand no chance against a human machine combination.
That's very interesting, but it strikes me that that is a mere temporary conquest on what seems the inevitable progression to a more powerful computer. Aren't you anticipating a time where the introduction of human judgment into the game of chess will be, by definition, a diminishing of the power of the system? That really you really have to get the ape out of the conversation to play the best possible chess?
Look, chess is mathematically infinite game. Technically, you can put numbers on paper, but it's a number of legitimate positions is 10 power 45.
Yeah.
So machines will never get to the bottom of that. So that's why you don't expect machine playing, first move and declaring mate in 15,375 moves. So it's the game is still full of mysteries. But obviously, at a certain point, you can reach a position where machine could see sort of the forced win or forced draw. But most of the in most of the positions, in most of the cases, in the middle of the chess game, they are far from sort of decided conclusions. So that's why you have to use your understanding. You have to, you still need some kind of, I call it common sense,
Mm.
To look for the best move. So, and I think that it's this experiment could go way beyond the game of chess, the chessboard, because they will while doing some new things. Again, let's go back to space exploration. I'm sure we'll be bumping into situations where machine may not be able to come up with the right answer, since the situation will be brand new. There were not enough information from its memory to analyze to come up with a rational conclusion, and the human intervention, human common sense, human ability to look for one or two options, but recognizing the pattern might be crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, this is a fascinating area that is not going away. We probably disagree in some of our assessments of just how concerned we should be about overpopulation on Mars, but I think I'll leave that. I'm going to leave that for our next conversation, which we will have hopefully when your new book comes out, because this is one of the great stories of our time, and I didn't know you had a book on this topic coming, and I can't wait to see it. And it is also, it's got to be at least midnight or later where you are now.
It's actually 11 o'clock here, but I used to live, with like universal
Yeah,
time.
right.
I travel probably too much, so that's why it's I'm always, people ask me if I'm jet lagged. I said no, I'm never jet lagged because I'm always jet
Yeah,
lagged.
yeah. Well, listen, it's really been a pleasure, Garry.
Thank you very much.
I hope to meet you in person next time.
Yes, absolutely.
Please take care, and please keep making noise on the topic that we spoke about, because
Look, you can hardly blame me for being silent.
you are a unique perspective, and so many people are going silent.
Thank you.
It's like the film The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. People are no longer making reasonable noises on the topic. So, to be continued, my friend.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are several ways you can support it. You can leave reviews on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you happen to listen to it. You can share it on social media with your friends. You can discuss it on your own blog or podcast, or you can support it directly at samharris.org/support.